this THETA round, and we are very, very happy to have with us Natalia Kunst. She's coming from Yale, where she's currently based at, and she's a research fellow there. And she's also a PhD candidate at the university in Norway, the University of Oslo University, or University of Oslo, I'm not sure which one is right. And Natalia has an interest in statistical and methodological issues in decision modeling, simulation modeling, and over the past a few years now, I think has been as you have seen in previous similar rounds, there has been a lot of value of information discussion and the value of further research. And kind of as part of this year's cycle of VOI related, the theme of VOI related talks at THETA, we welcome Natalia to talk a bit about the value of further research in the 21 assay decision-making in breast cancer. So thank you very, very much for coming, and we're looking forward to your talk. If you have any questions that you want to ask during next, we would prefer if you ask them at the end, but if there are some pressing questions, feel free to interrupt. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here and to present one of my projects, which is about quantifying the value for the research to improve 21-gene assay decision-making in breast cancer. And before I begin, I would like to mention that this work wouldn't be possible without my great collaborators and the really amazing help. And I would like to also acknowledge my colleagues from the Convoy group for some of the materials that I will be using. So in this project, we were interested in evaluating the value for the research on the 21-gene assay for breast cancer management. And to give you some background first, in breast cancer management, adjuvant chemotherapy is used to reduce the risk of distant recurrence and improve patient survival. And while adjuvant chemotherapy is a standard treatment for patients with triple negative tumors, there is uncertainty around the use of chemotherapy in women with node negative, ER positive, HER2 negative breast cancer. And this is because the absolute benefits of chemotherapy may be small and may not be worth the added risk of adverse events and toxicities from chemotherapy. Consequently, the use of chemotherapy may lead to an increase in healthcare costs and reduce in health-related quality of life, and this may outweigh chemotherapy benefits. Therefore, a number of risk stratification models have been developed to help guide chemotherapy decisions in women with breast cancer, and some examples of those models are Adjuvant Online and Predict. And these models are commonly used in clinical practice. The risk stratification models are based on clinical pathologic information, and they estimate survival benefits of hormone therapy and chemotherapy. However, the predictions of these models are suboptimal because tumors with similar clinical pathologic characteristics may have different metastatic potential. The 21-gene assay Oncotype DX is a genomic test that has the potential to guide treatment decisions, among others in breast cancer, and this assay provides recurrence score and predicts patients' prognosis and also response to chemotherapy. In general, the 21-gene assay performs better than risk stratification models, but it is also very costly, so its unrestricted use may result in a substantial economic burden. And a number of studies evaluated the cost effectiveness of the 21-gene assay. Many of them concluded that the 21-gene assay represents a cost-effective strategy, yet recently published literature review indicated that the majority of these studies incorporated some questionable assumptions that could potentially result in misleading conclusions. And among those assumptions were ignoring clinical pathologic information. That is, many studies evaluated the cost effectiveness of the 21-gene assay without accounting for that clinicians would also use risk stratification models, which are freely available online and commonly used in clinical practice. Also, many studies combined low, intermediate, and high risk groups, while the 21 gene assay may represent a cost-effective strategy only in patients with a specific risk of distant recurrence. Next, assuming decrease in chemotherapy use and predictive value of the 21 gene assay, and both of these assumptions were based on very limited evidence in the literature. Many studies ignored chemotherapy toxicities and assumed or used non-population-based recurrence score distribution, and the two last assumptions were implausible estimates of chemotherapy effectiveness and a young patient age. Consequently, we get this question whether we can deem the use of the 21 gene assay to be cost-effective based on the currently available evidence. So what we aim to do in the present study was to quantify uncertainty in current decision-making on the use of the 21 gene assay in women with breast cancer, and to inform decisions about future 21 gene assay studies design and prioritization. And we aim to do that by applying a full value of information analysis. So in other words, we wanted to answer the question whether we should demand collection of additional data before making decision about the use of the 21 gene assay, and if so, which research studies should be prioritized. In our methods, we use decision analytic modeling and the full value of information analysis. And starting with decision analytic modeling, we developed a time-dependent Markov model that evaluates the cost-effectiveness of the 21 gene assay in women with early breast cancer stratified by their clinical risk. And we stratified women using the PREDICT model. We classified them into 3 clinical risk groups with absolute 10-year survival benefit from chemotherapy of below 3% for women in the low-risk group, between 3 and 5% for women in the intermediate risk group, and above 5% for women in the high-risk group. Our model considered 2 strategies for each clinical risk group, which we identified as relevant in clinical practice, and those were population-based chemotherapy with the 21 gene assay and population-based chemotherapy without the 21 gene assay. The 2 main outcomes of our model were cost and quality adjusted life years. The decision tree that I will present shortly outlines how we allocated patients into different treatment strategies, and our Markov model was developed in line with the model by the NICE in the UK. Here I present how we allocated patients into different treatment strategies, and what is the most important here is that we evaluated the cost effectiveness of the 21 gene assay separately for PREDICT low, intermediate, and high risk group. So within each, so within each of these PREDICT risk groups, we considered 2 strategies with and without the 21 gene assay. The cohort in the strategy without the 21 gene assay proceeded to the Markov model, and in the strategy with the 21 gene assay, the cohort was further stratified into low, intermediate, and high recurrence score, and thereafter patients moved to the Markov model. Here I present our Markov model. So all patients start in the recurrence-free health state, and they are at risk of developing distant recurrence and experiencing chemotherapy toxicities and adverse events, which are acute myeloid leukemia and congestive heart failure. In line with the model by NICE, we accounted for or assumed that proportion of patients with distant recurrence would also develop a local recurrence for that. And we accounted for the death due to breast cancer, chemotherapy toxicities, and other causes. Importantly, we evaluated the cost effectiveness of the 2019 assay in real-world practice. And what I mean with that is that we accounted for all the assumptions that were relevant to appropriately reflect the use of the 2019 assay in clinical practice. So in other words, we address all the worrisome assumptions that were identified by the literature review. Some other assumptions of our model were discounting rate of 3%, a lifetime horizon, starting age of 60 years. The analysis was performed from a US payer perspective, and we used utility weights from the literature. And using our model, we estimated incremental cost and qualities, as well as incremental cost effectiveness ratios. We performed probabilistic sensitivity analysis, which we presented in form of cost effectiveness acceptability curves and frontier, as well as we performed a number of scenario analysis. And before going into value of information analysis in our project, I would like to briefly talk about value of information analysis in general, just to make sure that everyone is familiar with this analysis. So there is uncertainty in every decision that we make, and this implies that there is always a chance that the decision we are making is the wrong decision. And with value of information analysis, we are interested in the consequences of making that wrong decision. That is, we want to estimate the cost and foregone benefits if our decision is wrong. And here it's also important to think about the size of the population that will be affected by the decision, because you can think that the cost per patient may be small, but the population is so large that the value of information will be high. Or otherwise, it can be as well that the population is very small, but the cost per patient is very large, and then the value of information will be high as well. So we want to answer the question how likely it is that we are making the wrong decision and how bad it is to make that wrong decision. We want to estimate the cost of uncertainty, that is the expected loss if we make the decision based on the currently available evidence. And we also are interested in estimating the expected benefits of research that is waiting with our decision and collecting more information and making the decision with better evidence. And value of information analysis consists of different methods, and which I present here on this figure. And as we are going down this figure, the information that we are getting becomes more practical and useful, but also the computational need is decreasing. And we start with the expected value of perfect information, EVPI. So EVPI provides information about the value of eliminating all uncertainty from our model. That is, we are interested in answering the question how much better we could do if we would eliminate all uncertainty from all input parameters in our model. And we can imagine that our model is this box here, which consists of 5 different input parameters, theta 1 to 5. And with EVPI, we estimate the value of eliminating all uncertainty from all of these input parameters. And although EVPI sounds theoretical, because it is in practice not feasible to, it is in practice not feasible to eliminate all uncertainty from our model and to have this perfect information. It provides very important information about the maximum value that can be gained by collecting additional information. So we know that if you are planning additional study, no further study should exceed this value. And then we are moving to EVPPI, which is the expected value of partial perfect information. And PPI is very similar to EVPI, but here we are choosing the specific input parameters or subset of parameters. And we estimate the value of eliminating all uncertainty from those parameters or subsets of parameters. And using EBPPI, we learn where to target research on which input parameters we should focus. So as we had EBPI, which was about eliminating all uncertainty from all input parameters in our model, now we are talking about selecting a few parameters or subsets of parameters and eliminating all uncertainty from those parameters. And EBPPI is already much more informative than EBPI because it helps us with learning where to target research, on which input parameters we should focus, but it still makes strong assumptions. And more specifically, it assumes that the data collection would come from an infinitely large sample size, which is in practice not feasible. That's why we are moving to EBSI, which is the expected value of sample information. And EBSI provides the most useful information, but it is also the most computationally expensive. And EBSI measures the value of reducing uncertainty by collecting additional information on specific input parameters using different sample sizes. And we estimate EBSI using Bayesian statistics. We first have our prior, we then simulate new data collection, and we obtain our posterior. And we can use EBSI to design a new research study and train research prioritization. Importantly, as our sample size is approaching infinity, the value of EBSI is approaching the value of EBPPI. And this is because EBPPI assumes that the data collection will come from an infinitely large sample size. So just to summarize, EBPPI was about eliminating all uncertainty from all input parameters in our model. EBPPI was about eliminating all uncertainty from selected input parameters in our model. And with EBSI, we are talking about reducing uncertainty by collecting additional information from specific input parameters in our model using a different sample size. And with EBPI, we can answer the question whether we should collect additional information, whether we should get additional evidence. With EBPPI, we identify which evidence we should focus on. And with EBSI, we can design the future study. And as I mentioned, EBSI is provides the most practical and useful information, but it is also the most computationally expensive. And this is especially the case when we are using gold standard nested Monte Carlo simulation. But fortunately, quite recently for EBSI approximation methods have been developed, and they all lowered computational costs. And as part of the collaborative network for value of information, which is a group of researchers that are interested in improving the calculation, adaptation, and application of VOI, we compared and assessed the accuracy and computational time required for each of these methods, and we found that all those methods are efficient and quick and accurate, provide accurate results, and we also provide practical guidance and recommendations to help inform the choice between those four efficient EBSI methods. Finally, we should also consider the cost of future study or of the study that we are planning. And to do that, we estimate the expected net benefit of sampling, which provides the marginal benefit of collecting additional information after having accounted for the cost of research. So ENBS is just the EBSI minus the cost of research study, and we can use ENBS to identify the optimal sample size at the point where ENBS reaches its maximum value. And now going back to our project and to the value of information, methods for value of information. Out of the 8 assumptions that were identified by the literature review as worrisome, we chose in our project 3 the most worrisome or critical assumptions, and those were using non-population-based recurrence score distribution, which is just the proportion of patients with low, intermediate, and high recurrence scores, given that they are in predict low, intermediate, or high risk group. Then assuming a decrease in chemotherapy use and the predictive value of the 21 gene assay. As the next step, we identified all the input parameters in our model that were informing this assumption. So for the first assumption, we used just the population-based joint distribution of the 21 gene assay, recurrence score, and predict clinical risk classification. For the second assumption, the presence of chemotherapy use, we used input parameters on patient proportion given chemotherapy without the 21 gene assay and odds ratios of receiving chemotherapy if given 21 gene assay. And for the last assumption on the predictive value of the 21 gene assay for distance recurrence, we used the parameters on 10-year risk of distance recurrence when given chemotherapy and the 21 gene assay, and hazard ratios of distance recurrence if the 21 gene assay has a predictive value. Then we proposed 3 different study designs that could collect additional information on the 3 assumptions. So for the first assumption on the 21 gene assay prediction distributions, we proposed a retrospective observational study. For the second assumption on the prevalence of chemotherapy use, we proposed a prospective observational study. And for the assumption on the predictive value of the 21 gene assay, we assumed that, that a randomized control trial would be needed. For the methods, we used spline linear regression meta-modeling approach for EV-PPI and Gaussian approximation approach for EDSA, which is one of the 4 methods that I mentioned previously. Importantly, we extrapolated our VOI results to a population level using a disease incidence in the US, 3% discounting rate, and a 10-year decision horizon. And going into our results, we evaluated our results separately for predict low, intermediate, and high risk group. And our results indicate that it is sentently not justified to conduct further research for women with intermediate and high risk of distance recurrence. We found that in those women, the use of the 21 gene assay and its cost effectiveness is well established and robust in the face of all parameter uncertainty. By contrast, we found that there is uncertainty around the use of the 21 gene assay and the cost effectiveness of the 21 gene assay in women with low risk of distance recurrence. And as you can see in the table, the strategy with the 21 gene assay leads to higher quality, but it is also associated with higher costs, giving an ICER of about $200,000 per quality. And the cost effectiveness acceptability curves and frontier indicate that the strategy with the 21 gene assay has a higher probability of cost effectiveness at a willingness to pay threshold exceeding $180,000 per quality, and this was the optimal strategy at a willingness to pay threshold above $200,000 per quality. The value of eliminating uncertainty, all uncertainty from our model, which is the top line in this figure, the PVPI, was positive at a willingness to pay threshold exceeding $90,000 per quality, reaching its maximum value of $1.3 billion at a willingness to pay threshold of $200,000 per quality, where the optimal strategy switched from without to with the 21 gene assay. Furthermore, the PPI indicates that all proposed studies had value on reducing uncertainty, but it was the RCP of the predictive value that had the greatest potential to efficiently reduce the uncertainty around the use of the 2020 assay in women with low risk of distant recurrence. Its highest value was at the willingness to pay threshold of $200,000 per quality, and it was about $1.1 billion. Importantly, the value of reducing uncertainty with this study was actually quite close to the value of eliminating all uncertainty from our model, which is the top line in this figure. And here I present population expected value of sample information, cost of research, expected net benefit of sampling, as well as the optimal sample sizes. And when we're looking at the lower row, at the willingness to pay threshold of $200,000 per quality, we found that all studies had positive marginal benefits, yet the randomized controlled trial provides the highest marginal benefit with its maximum ENBS of $900 million at its optimal sample size of 2,900. And the other two studies had lower marginal benefits, but they were still positive as well and could be considered, for example, if the RCP would not be feasible. The retrospective observational study had the optimal size as large as it's possible to collect because it's a registry study, so of course we are interested in getting as much information as we can. There is no additional cost per patient added to the data set. However, this situation looked a bit different when we are willing to pay up to $150,000 per quality. So we can see that the RCT remains a study of choice. It provides the highest marginal benefit with its maximum ENBS of $60 million at its optimal sample size of 1,800. However, the other two studies provided are either none or minor positive marginal benefits. I also present these results in the form of a table where I present the value of reducing uncertainty marginal benefits of all studies and optimal sizes across a range of willingness to pay thresholds. And across all the considered willingness to pay thresholds, we found that the randomized control trial was the one that was providing the highest value, reducing uncertainty as well as the highest marginal benefits. PPI was positive already at the willingness to pay threshold of $110,000 per quality, but it was first at the willingness to pay threshold of $150,000 per quality, where there were positive marginal benefits. And this is because we accounted for the cost of research as well as for the finite sample sizes. Additionally, we considered all other individual parameters in our model just to make sure that we are not missing anything and that there were not any other input parameters that should be targeted in further research. We found that there are few input parameters that could be considered, including in further research, and those were acute myeloid leukemia risk, congestive heart failure risk, and futility weight. However, the value of PPI was lower for these input parameters than for the input parameters that we used in our study. And we performed a number of scenario analysis. First, we used a different classification for the recurrence score. which was used in a recently published research trial. And then we found that the strategy with the 2019 assay had a higher probability of cost effectiveness first at a willingness to pay threshold exceeding $240,000 per quality, so at a higher willingness to pay threshold, and it was first the optimal strategy at a willingness to pay threshold exceeding $320, I think, $1,000 per quality. And the value of both eliminating uncertainty as well as reducing all the studies was higher, but also at higher willingness to pay threshold. Importantly, it was the reference score classification that we used in our study that has been widely used in clinical practice and in all studies. And we also considered different technology lifetimes. So in our base case, we had a 10-year technology lifetime, considered increasing and decreasing technology lifetime. So when we decrease the technology lifetime, the value of eliminating and reducing uncertainty decreased. When we increase, the value of information also increased. But what is the most important here is that even when we decrease the technology lifetime to 5 years instead of 10 years, the value of eliminating and reducing uncertainty, especially by the LCT, remains high. And a similar situation was for the disease incidence. So we decreased the disease incidence by 10% and increased as well. And we found that the value of reducing uncertainty remained high, and was actually, our results were not so sensitive to these changes. So they were more sensitive to the technology lifetime than to the disease incidence. So to conclude, our study highlights the need for the research that would provide better evidence to inform decision-making on the 2019 assay. Our results indicate that future research should focus on women with low risk of distant recurrence, as we found little decision uncertainty around the use of the 2019 assay in women with intermediate and high risk of distant recurrence. We also found that the LCT of the predictive value of the 2019 assay has the greatest potential to efficiently reduce the decision uncertainty around the use of the 2019 assay in women with low risk of distant recurrence. And just as a closing part, our study provides important insights on further research that can improve decision disease management and help design further research studies. And thank you. And
go first. Thanks a lot, Natalia. I thought this may have been the best explanation of value of information I've ever seen, like, seriously. So congratulations on that. And I may steal your slides if I have to teach it. I've never honest explanation. You coming from Anna and then okay. But I think that what makes me really uncomfortable with the whole concept is the fundamental assumptions that we make our assumptions based on cost effectiveness or based on an incremental cost effectiveness ratio at a specific threshold, and or that we could potentially throw everything that's relevant into that either. And that's not the case. Not the case in Canada. I would say it's not the case in most jurisdictions, also in the UK. And so I kind of wonder what are your thoughts on that? Like, that just makes me really uncomfortable. That's not how we make decisions. So, you know, how...
You mean that we don't make decisions based on the willingness to pay threshold?
Yeah.
So I agree.
So
that's why we were
ISOs everything.
Yeah, I agree. So that's why. Well, so we were trying to show our results across a wide range of willingness to pay thresholds, so that the decision makers can really tell, like, okay, how much are we willing to pay, and then make the decision based on that. So even in the paper, we didn't want to choose one like specific willingness to pay threshold, although we were asked to do so. So we used one as an example. but we prefer to just show like across a wide range and say like, okay, if you're willing to pay less than $150,000 per quality, you're better off with the current evidence and just make a decision right now. If you're willing to pay more than that, then you should collect more evidence, and then which studies would be best to perform.
So it's still an ISA, right? Like I think like, so what I'm struggling with is like, so what about equity? What about access? What about like all kind of other things that go into the decision making, right? And how that, so either it's thrown into the ISA in one way or another, or it's kind of outside, and then
ISA and like net monetary benefit, I would say like what is the optimal strategy in value of information. It's more like based on the net, but I agree that it's based on the decision analytic model, so it's like all within that framework, and that's why as well like we were trying to reflect the clinical practice as good as possible, because this also like if there are several strategies and they are not included, that will be wrong. If there are like some other things that will not be in the analysis, that will be also, this will lead to a wrong result. So yeah.
But again, you do have a point, but this is, I don't know if there is a solution to it that is not, I mean, decision making is not done, even for further funding, is not done using one outcome, like using a VOI. Like, I don't think anyone proposes that the result from the VOI should directly inform decision on funding on its own. But let's say you do a deliberative process to fund further research, this could be one of the things that they would fall on the table together with. It's similar how you.
No, I get it. I think it's just often also not presented that way. So I think it's the underlying assumption that
that's the one thing that would drive the decision.
Exactly. I think that's often omitted, and you kind of think this is what it is all about. But I think, and then some of the variables wouldn't even be in there, right? And you could argue that, well, we also want to improve equity or access or something else, and for that reason, we would be willing to accept a higher ISA than we would be otherwise. I think there are ways to kind of get around it or get kind of closer to reflecting real-life decision making. And so in that sense, that would probably be kind of a lower estimate of how much we should invest in getting this information. And I think the other thing that's probably still out there, though, is then, so there are these other considerations are often not built into this type of model. So there might be actually information that we would be interested in, but it's not built actually into this type of model.
Just to build on what THETA was saying, so this technology came forward for a funding decision in the province of Ontario in the fall, with instead ProSigna, COTEC GX, MammoPrint, I think it was the fourth one. The funding recommendations are all posted, and they did stratify by risk. The kind of crude, I guess, ISER, pre-VOI ISER, was nowhere near 200,000 per quality gain. It was, I think, in a more reasonable range, which sort of raises this issue of why do VOI around an unreasonable ISER? Why not simply say, well, what's the range that's reasonable to decision makers, the threshold, and that threshold must be consistent with other funding decisions because you're allocating a budget. What is that range for this particular jurisdiction? So Ontario might look at funding decisions and say it's always between, let's say, 50 and 100. You can't just isolate a threshold for a technology. It has to be for the budget, right? And say, okay, within that range, this is historically where Ontario has funded the technology, then do the VOI and say what's the value of reducing uncertainty. Because I
think like it's a bit different in the US. I would say when they don't have like any willingness to pay threshold, so it's kind of like, that's why we like also we had a lot of discussion like what willingness to pay threshold, like there is none. So it depends so much on there are so many decision makers depending on if it's a private or like so it's kind of like I would say as well like in Norway it would be very different because we have like we have some ranges. One can say
it's something that's supposed to vary, right? It's a threshold. So either something has value or it doesn't.
Well, it depends who makes the decision as well. Like in the US, we have so many payers. So it depends like
within each budget, though, there should be some.
But they can have also different budgets. like every payer can have.
I'm saying in the real world, there should be consistency across funding decisions, and that's the range.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And I think like having like, if we would have like a specific, I don't know if like in Canada there is like,
No, but it's very easy to deduce the range based on actual revealed preferences around what's been funded.
Yeah.
I think at least this confirms that you were right to make a decision, because below 100,000 you've got no valuable information, so you made the right decision.
That's the way I would interpret this. If there's nothing happening under 150, then that's the way I would interpret that.
Yeah, me too. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think, what was your actual incremental quality of using the test versus not using the test? Because everything else is just cost. But what was the actual benefit to the individual from a life expectancy and the quality of the life expectancy across the three stratifications? If you basically go and take a look at that, it gives you your answer as to do we go for this or not? Because I think with your low risk, the incremental quality was 0.03.
Yeah, that's good.
Why are we going after these diagnostic evaluations independent of whatever the cost is? In the sense that it's just so nominal from a benefit that why bother? The other thing is, from the standpoint of adjusting your analysis based on the actual cost of the technology, a lot of the problems is these technologies are too expensive and they're trying to take too much money out of the system. And how did you adjust your analysis to show what the appropriate cost of the technology should be to make it reasonable from a willingness to pay perspective? Did you do that and push back and say, you're charging too much for this, we're only willing to pay this?
No. So we were not like, we were not focusing so much on this part that, the cost of the technology. Like if you would decrease the cost, then the cost effectiveness would be
well, there has to be a societal reasonableness too, right? Like, like in the U.S. where you have your private system where you can just increase your cost per member covered fees and push the system back. We don't necessarily have that. We raise our taxes, right?
Yeah.
So what's the cost of the diagnostic evaluation per person?
I think it's about $3,000 or $4,000.
So it's cheap on a general scale, right? Okay, that's not too bad. So there's no real reason to move that price point in general, right? It can be lower. If you can do your ancestry DNA for $99, then maybe you're $3,000 for the test. You want to pay the incremental month, but what's the quality? Big difference for the high and for the intermediate?
The quality, the incremental quality, I don't remember now. I think it was very small. It was like 0.0 something. So that's why like even the cost effectiveness acceptability groups were, they were not really like reaching to 100%. And I willingness to pay threshold up to like even 400,000. But the cost of the test, like of the ODX, is high. So it's like it's too high. But the cost of like healthcare in the US are
higher anyway. Moving it here to make
but I agree that it would be best to push them. Like I think it's difficult, especially like in the US, to push those prices. Like they should be lower. Like I don't know how it's in Canada, but I think like in Norway it's easier that they push because they say I will not reimburse if you will not decrease the price. And that is kind of like push for the pharmaceuticals to decrease the price. But like in the US, I think they don't have this.
And two things. One, with regards to the small quality, just a note that, I mean, any screening strategy would have a very small quality gain per person. That doesn't mean anything. It means that, if the screening is very cheap, then it could be like, an intervention that would reduce, like one case out of 1,000, but this case being very, fatal, that is still an important intervention if it's very cheap. So, the interpretation of the quality is a bit trickier. And the second thing, this comment that you made actually made me think that you could use VOI possibly for understanding what's the value of, for example, in Canada, we have a collective agreement to buy the drugs across provinces cheaper. So you could say maybe the investment, you could make an investment in reducing price rather than make an investment in improving evidence.
But it's not like, that would be a difference. Because it's like, what's the cost of like reducing?
It's not
and that would be
not definitely wrong.
like,
Yeah, you're right.
It would be more like just cost effectiveness analysis wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Just be mad at what price.
Yeah.
You don't need live information, you can just calculate how much.
Yeah.
Drop that. Any other questions? I have one. I do. So it was, I think, like Wendy kind of alluded to it, but in the Cardiff, in the, I don't remember if it was federal or provincial evaluation of oncotype DX, there were 3 or 4 alternatives. I noticed that you have only compared it against no oncotype. I mean, first of all, would you think that maybe the other strategies should be included?
Yeah.
And how much more complicated the understanding of the investment becomes if you have multiple strategies?
It was so at first we were considering, now I don't, because it's been like some time, but so we were considering 4 different treatments or like 4 different strategies. But then we have seen that actually in clinical practice it would be like either used or not. That there was like other, now I don't remember which ones we included. There were 2 more. It for sure it didn't complicate it because it was easy to apply, and like for BOI it didn't really complicate the results. But
because I imagine, for example, if you want an RCT, the RCT would be, you'd have to include like 3 arms or 4 arms in an RCT, or have 3 RCTs to understand the relative effectiveness. So
yeah, but then like some like strategies. What other strategies?
like other tests, like on site.
Oh, other tests.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, we used the one that is most commonly used. I know that in the UK they considered, I think, like 5. So they used BOI to design the study, and they then found that, I don't remember which one test, but they found another test that should focus on. But I think that there is like the difference between those tests is very small. There is one that considers, I think, like 9, so this like 21. This assay examines 21 genes. There is one like with 90 or something like that. But we use the one that is the most commonly used in the US. So that's why we focus on this one. Yeah.
But yeah, in the UK, there's a value of information where they worked out which tests should go into the trial.
Yeah.
Based on value.
So they use VOI to actually design the study.
Right.
Yeah, and they run this study in the UK and in Norway. Yeah, in a poster like a few months ago. Yeah.
Cool. There are no other questions. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.